Okay, thank you so much, Yazid, for actually covering the DNS, the background of the DNS, and including why it's a very important and critical infrastructure. So in this part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about attacks on the DNS. And with this in mind, I just want to reiterate that basically, attackers usually they do their homework before they conduct a given piece of attack. And they first of all try and determine how they can actually enter and penetrate your systems. So for this, the attacker will need to know whether the infrastructure, the map of the infrastructure and the system host names, or even the IP addresses, and basically how he or she can be able to obtain the login credentials. So this is actually known in cybersecurity parlance as reconnaissance. So an attacker will perform a reconnaissance on vulnerable systems or even systems of interest that they think that they like to actually acquire, exfiltrate data, or actually to abuse maybe the infrastructure of those systems. And one of the most interesting things is that the DNS is a very rich source of information, and Yazid has already shown this. And so what happens is that traffic bound to the infrastructure that is under consideration by the attacker uses perhaps DNS or maybe some internal mechanism like ActiveX directory. But in many cases, it's many of these systems use a DNS to try and resolve, the IP to hostname mappings. So if they're able to actually redirect DNS traffic to their own infrastructure, they can be able to actually phish and actually gain credentials from the end users or from the victims. So from this point of view, the DNS is a very valuable point of attack, allowing even bad actors to enter into your systems. And this raises a very, very interesting question. Why is the DNS actually a target for attacks? First and foremost, as we've already seen, the DNS itself is a very core internet technology. It's a very fundamental internet technology. Nearly every resolution from IP addresses to host names, and host names or even domain names to IP addresses utilizes this. There's thousands, in fact, billions of queries that are sent every day to actually the root servers, to authoritative name servers in order to resolve these queries. And because of this, the DNS is actually a very, very big target for attacks because of the fact that it actually provides the very essential service of translation of domain names into IP addresses. Then the other thing also is that because we've come to rely on the DNS as a very critical piece of the internet architecture, any disruption on the DNS can actually disrupt very, very essential services, such as government services, e-learning, or even social engagement, or even social networks. You and I already have seen what happened on October 4th when Facebook was actually, their DNS actually stopped working. And this was due to also another problem they had with their ASN, where the BGP actually failed to advertise. So when even an entire, can I say, service like Facebook was actually affected by DNS going offline, you could imagine how many billions of users were actually adversely affected by this. And the other thing is that the DNS, because of all the wealth of information contains, the DNS contains information about your name servers, their mail servers. It contains the mappings of also other things such as also such as perhaps also the WHOIS database, which contains, amongst other things, such as the registration, when the domain name was actually updated, when it's going to expire, who registered this. All that kind of information is quite actually a rich source for attackers to use. And because of this, attackers will use various exploitation vectors. They can actually try and register a malicious domain. They can actually try and hijack the name resolution process, and also try and, if not, even hijack even the name servers and other core components of the DNS to actually direct traffic to their own site. They can actually try and corrupt DNS data. This is by modifying records, such that even a mapping that was supposed to go to a legitimate IP address could then be mapped to theirs. And they could also conduct certain tricks such as cache poisoning. Cache poisoning is now actually injecting fraudulent responses to the resolver, to the recursive resolver, such that when an end user that you saw in the diagram that Yazid had shown with the iPhone tries to connect to the recursive resolver, they'll actually get they'll actually be given, can I say, a spoofed response. And so these are some of the ways that attackers actually try and actually exploit the DNS. And this is a good diagram that actually tries to show you the entire DNS infrastructure and also the points of, on the target points in the ecosystem. So let's start on the left-hand side. So the stub is basically the piece of DNS software on maybe an end-user device, such as a laptop, or even an Android phone, or maybe even an iPhone. So between now that device and perhaps the recursive resolver, which is then the ISP or within the cloud, a man-in-the-middle attack, an attacker can conduct a man-in-the-middle attack to try and find out what kind of queries that you as an end user are sending to the recursive resolver. And from that, they can try and actually exfiltrate or even information, or even they can even inject even malicious packets, such that basically they'll give you false responses. So that's one of the forms of attacks that could occur at this layer. Then let's look at also between the recursive resolver and the authoritative name servers. So let's have a look at this. So the recursive resolver and the authoritative name servers, an attacker could try and actually change the actual response to be a spoofed response and inject those spoofed responses onto the recursive resolver. And using that, we actually call this a cache poisoning attack, where basically the attacker was able to actually change the data or the DNS data and inject it directly into the cache of the recursive resolver. So this is known as a cache or poisoned or modify or cache poisoning attack. So then let's also look at also within the authoritative name servers. So an organization like Metu has one primary and also a secondary, but there are some organizations that have even multiple secondary, more than 2 secondary name servers. So if an attacker gains access into those authoritative name servers, he or she can be able to actually change records at will. And therefore you have data corruption at this level. And then the other thing is also during transfer of maybe a zone file from now the primary to now the secondary name servers, an attacker can hijack this process and be able to actually spoof the zone transfer, and then the secondaries are now serving spoofed data. So this is just also another level in which the DNS can be attacked. Then look at also the level of whereby, and you can look at the right-hand side, what about those who register domains, such as the registrar and such as the end user? Are they also susceptible to attacks? Yes. So whenever there is actually a domain name registration, there's an interface between now the registry and the authoritative name servers. And in this case here, what may happen is that if an attacker gains access to perhaps maybe the registry, they can be able to modify data and even corrupt it. And therefore, the data that is now going to authoritative name servers is actually fraudulent, or can I say, it has actually been spoofed. Then let us also look at the example of perhaps a registrar and a registry. So a registrar is now the go-to person that an end user will consult in order to register a domain. So between the registrar and the registry, there's usually a transfer, there's usually what is known as Extensible Provisioning Protocol, EPP, and the EPP is used to actually do other things such as domain name transfer, and apart from that, also to update also certain can I say information with respect to the registrants. So what happens if an attacker is able to gain access to the EPP credentials? Then they themselves can actually be able to transfer the domain to their own, can I say, to their own infrastructure. So when EPP is compromised, even an attacker can be able to do other things such as change a domain name or even transfer it to their site. Then let us not also forget the end user, the registrant, and maybe the browser or the interface they use to actually register a domain. So there could be many problems here. There could be a man-in-the-middle attack. There could maybe be even attacks such as cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery that actually steals credentials from the registrant, and in this case here also they could also be redirected to a phishing site. So these are all the potential problems with the DNS, and although many of them are being addressed today, unfortunately, there are always new ways that attackers are looking at in order to actually up the ante and even attack the DNS in very creative ways. So, knowing what you've already seen, then let us also understand a few things. That at the infrastructure, the DNS actually runs on the application layer, and that is layer 7 of the can I say the TCP IP model. And so in this case here, what we do know is that it relies on other layers. These are lower layers, such as the data link layer and even the physical layer, and also the network layer. And in this lower layers, you have such devices such as routers, switches, firewalls, and middle boxes. So it is very important that how you actually architect your network, because how you architect your network greatly affects how the DNS will actually behave. And hence, besides only just protecting the layer on the DNS, such as the recursive name servers, and also the DNS data itself, you also have to think of also operational security practices, such as filtering, maybe using access control lists, maybe using DDoS measures, anti-DDoS measures. Also, perhaps maybe rate limiting, maybe the number of queries that you can send, perhaps over duration. So all these things also matter when you're actually thinking of actually good security hygiene. Then also, let us also not forget that besides the infrastructure or the lower layers or that the DNS is actually relies on, the DNS is also software. So think about also the software that is coded for actually implementing DNS, maybe perhaps the resolver software or the authoritative name server software. Most of this software runs on basically most operating systems, whether it is Linux, BSD, or even Windows. And the most common ones are bind, NSD, unbound, not DNS. So one of the things that that even researchers and also security experts have to monitor is also whether there are bugs in this software. So this software needs to be audited. So, or else if there are vulnerabilities found in this, not only may an attacker use those vulnerabilities to just maybe compromise the DNS, but also compromise entire systems. So it's also important that software is also not overlooked, and also a thorough audit is done on it. Then another thing also is that one of the things that makes the DNS also pretty difficult to defend and also to secure is because it is a very complex protocol. The DNS was first standardized in 1987 in actually two documents, RFC 1034 and RFC 1035. But since 1987, there have been now 275 more standards that total around over 3,000 pages that actually add functionality to the DNS, including security functionality. Because of this, the DNS has actually evolved to be a very complex piece of software. And in it, it's very, very prone to having bugs and even other vulnerabilities. So in this case, also when you're looking at the DNS and securing the DNS, you don't just look also at the software, but also at the protocols themselves, and also ensuring that that even as you actually deploy secure protocols, that the DNS also is also taken into consideration, and the fact that it's also complex. So, that actually is just my short presentation. I can see that there's a question I've got here from Alperen. So when the Facebook got attacked and shut down almost one day, what type of attack happened, such as cache and something? So Alperen, what happened on October 4th was not an attack as such. What really happened, it was a human error. So this is from what I get, and these are the sequence of events. Around 1540 UTC, that's around 20 minutes to 7 in Istanbul. The network engineers at Facebook made a configuration change to their routing, and so the routers actually, they speak a protocol known as BGP, Border Gateway Protocol. And Border Gateway Protocol is related to what Fahad has asked you to look at, and that is ASN. So every network on the internet is identified by an autonomous system number. And what Facebook has is the autonomous system number is the number 32943. So when the administrators in Facebook changed the BGP, the Facebook ASN stopped actually telling the entire world how to reach it. So in other words, there was no network on the internet that could actually reach Facebook. And this happened around 1540, but by around 1600 GMT, Facebook was completely inaccessible to the entire world because nobody could, there are no routes to getting to the Facebook ASN. However, the fact that Facebook actually withdrew their ASN from their entire internet created a secondary problem, and this is the problem with DNS. So Facebook has a sequence of DNS servers that actually serve all the traffic globally, and they are distributed across different data centers. So when the DNS servers detected that there was something wrong with the BGP on the Facebook network, they too also stopped functioning. So what really happened is there were two actually critical problems that happened. BGP failed and DNS failed, and therefore it was not possible for anyone to access Facebook, WhatsApp, and even Instagram for at least 7 good hours, because this was actually a problem that even affected the Facebook employees. The Facebook employees could not even access even their own tools from within the network. So what happened is they resorted to physically going to the data centers and trying to rectify this. So this was not really a cache poisoning, or a cyber attack. It was actually a human error that cascaded across the internet, and Facebook was completely shut off from being accessed. I hope that clarifies things, Alperen. Okay. Thank you so much. So let me hand over the next part of the presentation. Yazid will take you through securing the DNS infrastructure. He's going to talk about the operational security practices you should consider when you're thinking of protecting the DNS, and also he'll walk you through them. So back to you, Yazid, so. Are you ready, Yazid, to take us through securing the DNS? Okay.
Yes, I am. Thank you.